Hello, welcome to Garden Chronicles. My name is James David, and in today's video I would like to talk about this particular Anthurium, commonly known as Black Beauty. Now this particular plant is actually having a problem here, that is to say that it has grown away above the pot, and I think it's a little bit more lanky and none of the roots is actually getting to the soil. There are root ball here, but it's not really working out. Now what is actually going to happen here is that if I don't do anything about it, this particular plant is actually going to grow taller and taller and taller and may break and fall due to its own weight. Similarly, like this particular Anthurium, if you notice over here, it has given out a lot of aerial roots, but sort of like it is malnutrition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to repot this, and I'm going to show to you how I actually do it. And also I've noticed that there are some burns over here, a lot of burns actually. It's not supposed to happen, but it's taking place here. So this is a sign of, in my point of view, it's too much of but over fertilized. So I think it's based because of recently I placed a lot of compost here, thinking that it will actually neutralize and balance and make this particular plant to bloom, but it did not, and I have to do something about it soon, and I have the time to do it today, and I would like to share to you how I do it and what it appears to be like if the plant is not root bound and it has grown out of the pot. And then you can actually journey with me in this video, and I can show to you exactly how it appears to be. I have actually had another video concerning this where I have spoken about this particular plant known as Black Beauty together with Anthurium brownie. Both of the plants are not really doing so well. Similarly, if you look over here, this is supposed to be brownie, and you see very badly damaged. The ones that is actually coming out, not really appears to be in good condition. So what I'm going to do today is that I'm going to show to you how I repot it, and hopefully that this particular plant will recover in 2 to 3 months time, or else what I'm afraid that this particular plant can go through over stress and may just die. So journey with me here today, and I'll show you how I'm going to pot them. So see you soon. So basically everything is ready and set up. I just want to share a little bit on the setup here. Actually, if you're actually working on this indoors, do make sure that you have a tray or a plastic sheet or something like that to undo the pot and work on it. Now when it comes to materials, I just want to share to you a little bit more on the context of what I'm actually using, and it was proven to be successful in my garden. Okay, my main ingredients are actually coconut chip. This is actually the real deal here. There's a lot of coconut trees around my region, and it's just that most of this will be like what do you call this, unpeeled, and will be thrown around on the roadsides, and more normally a garbage guy will always collect it. And if you're lucky, or in my case it will be there for about 1 to 2 weeks time, I'll just collect how much I need. So what I'll do here is that after this, I will normally trim them down into small chips. So this is actually very helpful for the root growth of any aroid plants, even orchids per se, so also Hoya. So basically majority of my material that is being used is actually coconut chips. So it's sort of like 30% in the material here, which is, you can see over here. So this is basically how it appears to be. Another thing about coconut chips is that they don't really 100% retain moisture. So if they are dry, they can be very dry. So the other catalyst material that I actually use is river sand. In a way, I find that river sand is very fast draining. and it really helps when these two actually goes together in a way that it doesn't rot, cause any root rot and stuff like that. Now I understand that in cases where you are staying and there is no way of an access that you can actually get your hands on coconut chips, you can actually buy something like this. It is actually a coconut fiber. I got it for RM 2 ringgit, which in a way, how do you say, very economical. You may not have to use the whole thing. You can actually use scissors, trim them down and just compact it with sand and any other materials that you can actually get your hands on. Okay, now let's say that you can't get river sand and you have no access with coconut chips, and you'll be wondering what you can actually use. In my hands, I actually have tried and find that even styrofoam works. So this, it's sort of like, what do you say, you can work on something on a material that is eco-friendly and actually do nature a favor by using recycled materials. So you can also use styrofoam. One of the things the best part about it here is that it is fast draining, and sometimes roots do go penetrate through them, so in a way it helps. So my point here is this, when it comes to anthuriums, the root ball actually breathes. So in a way, similar like any other aroid species like Monstera or Anthurium or Photos, those kind of things do require a fast draining material as their potting medium. At the same time, it should be in a way that it is breathable and also able to retain moisture. So these are the materials that I'm actually using. Let's say the alternative would be something like leca ball, how do you say, sphagnum moss, perlite, and all those mixture medium that is sold as an aeroid mix. That is per se that if you can't get your hands on this material. So why am I using this? Simply because they are easily available. In my case, is purely free because all this is appears to be around my surrounding areas, which I don't have to spend a bomb buying a aeroid mix. I think in a bag 1 kg will cost about RM 20 to 30 ringgit, and I find that is as good and as equivalent as what I'm actually using now. And to prove a point that all of my anthuriums in my hands are thriving because of this. So in a way, I am using this because it works in my garden space due to the fact that the indirect light together with rainy days and nothing gets rotten and it dies. So in a way, this helps for me. So see how it helps for you, and you try it out according to your garden condition. So all that has been said and done, I just want to show to you my setup here, and I'll catch you back on my unpotting. So with all the materials that has been set and ready to go, so let's do the unpotting. Here is the Anthurium Black Beauty, and I'm actually going to unpot it. Now in most cases when it comes to anthuriums, the root ball may be very tight and may fasten itself against the pot. So in a way it can be tough. Again, you will never know until you try it on. This particular one seems to be very easy and smooth. Normally I will inspect the pot inside just to make sure that there is no pests attached to it, especially root mealybugs. So in a way this particular one is considered healthy. Let's inspect the current potting media, and I can actually want to run through you with some details over here so that you will be aware of it. Over here you can see that a big portion of it has become more of a compost material here, and I find that that could be one of the reasons why the plant is not really doing well. Don't get me wrong, compost is actually very good, but however the problem here is that too much of it can cause root problems, and this particular one, in my point of view, it could be very acidic, and so the root has migrated itself on a top surface, and therefore there's nothing foundational at the bottom. So basically this is what I'm actually going to do. Over here I'm going to remove the root ball off from the existing potting media. Here I'm actually going to use the same potting media. I find that the compost is still healthy, and I have found some earthworms wriggling through it, and I find that that is good. So I'm just a little bit of cleaning up. I'm actually using the same pot because I find that nothing wrong with it, and it is going to be a little bit of a hands-on. So if you're a type of person that are comfortable using gloves, do so. In my sense that I just want to make it quick and fast. In a way, if you are a fast and experienced gardener, you can actually unpot and repot the whole thing within 10 minutes time. So basically that is a time set that you can actually look into, in effect, that if you're repotting. So let's say if you're rushing for time and all that, you can just keep an eye that it can an estimate of 15 to 30 minutes time. So in a way, do keep that in mind if you're repotting, in case you are rushing for something else. Now over here I've noticed that this is the actual problem. One particular anthurium, the bigger portion which I actually removed, has overtaken the whole root ball, and this particular one is struggling. I for one like to have a combo kind of a setup when it comes to plants, because lacking which, especially when it comes to space, these are the problems that I actually face. I don't know whether you can actually notice here, there is something wiggling over here. If you can notice it, that is actually the earthworm that is full of it in my potting medium. So one of the things that I really have to mention to you here is that if you're the type of a person who do not like earthworms, it's going to be challenging, and I would really advise you not to use compost if you don't want earthworms, especially when you're living in a indoor living space. So therefore I would suggest that we strongly recommend that if you're actually using compost, do not do so in a indoor living space. So what I'm actually doing here is that I'm actually collecting all this earthworm so I can use it for my compost bin, which actually aids and helps the compost process in my compost bin. So I currently managed to collect about 3 or 4 pieces here, and I've actually kept aside. Do keep in a separate container with a little bit of soil in it and put them in a compost bin. Now coming back to this particular plant, now over here you can see that I'm actually showing to you that there's about 3 plants that is growing as in one root ball. Somehow you must understand, when it comes to anthuriums, they behave like a colony plants. So over time you can expect them to have many pups growing together as one. And this particular one, in a way, you can see there's about 3 pieces of root ball have sort of like separated itself from one piece, and it's sort of like over matured itself and is struggling. So coming to this, I'm actually trying to separate each of the individual of the anthurium plants, and I find that by doing so I actually have 3 separate plants instead of one plant with 3 branches. So do be gentle about it. In a way, I find that just a careful tug and you can just separate them. In case you want to use the scissors, you can do so, depending on your circumstances or what you feel it is comfortable to you. There's a lot of dry leaves, and there is a kind of if you can see it over here, this particular piece is quite long, and normally what I'll do here is that I'm planning to trim it into half so that it will not be too long into the pot. So these are the 3 pieces here, and you can see that it's quite easily detachable and able to work on easily. So I'm actually removing all the dry leaves and even the what you call that piece that is sticking against the leaf shield, if I'm not wrong. Very common for philodendron species. So that particular pieces, so I'm just removing all those unwanted dry leaves pieces around the root ball, just to make it clean so that it will not cause any rot problems. Also, there will be some leaves that may be dry or too matured, and you can actually remove them too. Now the plant is very much set, so let's begin with the repotting. Basically, I'm just using back the compost, which is about 30% here. Over here, I'm actually checking through, and I'm using this a little bit of this as a drainage hole, a little bit of a sponge together with coconut husk, just putting it so that because I find that the drainage hole is quite big, and I'm worried that whatever that I put in might just drain out. So whatever that has been left over, I find that it's still good in condition, so I'm just applying about 30% of it just to give a little bit of some room for it. And normally when it comes to compost, I always put it at the bottom of the pot, so it just gives that a good space for it to give a little bit of a room for it to grow. Of course, you can notice a little bit of white balls over there. Those are actually styrofoam, which is from the earlier medium that I've actually used. So then that particular portion is already done. Now what I have the next is just putting in the plants, which is quite easy and as direct as you can see. Over here I'm actually cutting all these long pieces of Anthurium plants into half, because I find that placing them as one whole piece seems to be a little bit not conducive for the plant, so making it more, and it also gives a good room for it to grow, and it can be much more healthier. Do take note that when it comes to Anthurium, when it grows very long, they do tend to become matured, and somehow they are not so healthy, so keeping them in small portions actually help. I was actually trying to think whether should I actually use back the whole piece there, and work out in it. And when I was thinking about it, that will it work, and I find that the whole root ball actually sitting on the whole pot, and I find that it's not conducive and practical to put them together as sharing plants. So I was thinking whether I should do that. So in a way I think it's not, so I have to create a separate pot and a potting media for it. So I was actually deciding, should I just keep it or take it out. So anyway, the idea did not work, so I have taken them out, and I'm actually working out with the Anthurium Black Beauty here, and I thought that just make use this whole pot as populated as one singular plant in this pot, instead of keeping two different Anthuriums in one pot. So actually here I'm trimming them into half. I'm just taking off all the spent leaves off, and just checking through if everything is okay. You can actually trim, or you can just snap and break it. So over here I actually trim them into half. I'm just putting them together. You can see it's actually you can just lightly sit on them. You don't really have to force the whole root ball in. Just lightly arrange all around the flower pot. Now what my style of planting them is to always plant them more, populating them to the side of the pot, so they will have a little bit more support, and also keep the other half of the pot a little bit more empty, because it'll be much more favorable when it comes to watering them, and there will be a little bit more space than if you intend to place another stacking of a pot on top of it. You may have space on it, so I find that it maximizing space as much as possible. Another thing that I want to mention to you here is that when it comes to Anthurium, I normally do not trim the root ball off. Somehow I find that if the root ball is being wounded, they tend to rot away. So do take note of it, not to damage the root ball even though they are very long. Somehow I find that when it comes to root balls, the more fuller they are, in a way to say that they are actually healthy. So try not to trim off the root ball, rather do cut off any of the spent or dried or burnt leaves off. That would be much more practical. So over here I'm actually cutting all of them into half, because there is some aerial roots around it which I can actually use. So in a way, from 3 plants I'm actually dividing them into 6 plants. So in a way that is a lot, and I find that it's much more worth it and practical for this particular Black Beauty Anthurium to grow and thrive in this particular condition. Of course, the factor of arranging some of the portions here, the leaves are actually dried, as I mentioned earlier, where it is over fertilized because of the compost. You can choose to trim off the whole leaf, but in my case I just take off the dried ones off, because I find that any chances of it where the leaves are still healthy and green, I will just normally leave it until the whole thing turn yellow, or there's nothing much of a green portion of the leaves on the foliage is there, then I'll just trim off the whole thing. It falls back on each individual gardener. In my case, I really don't bother so much, especially when it comes to anthuriums. None of the leaves are actually perfect. Somehow along the line you will always find something wrong with anthurium leaves, so do so in the idea that keep in mind that you will not actually get perfect leaves. So do not remove too much of the leaves, and the plant may go dormant and even die out of stress. So when it comes to propagation, just let the plant has many leaves as possible, so that it will not go through stress. So after placing them lightly on top of the pot with the compost at the bottom, I'm actually using a portion of all the coconut chips that I shown you earlier. Just lightly arrange it, just to have its little bit of a body and support around the root ball. Do take note that most of the roots that are actually available is actually aerial roots around the plant, or you can along the stem. You can if you can were to say it. So it's not really primary roots, more like a secondary roots. So do take note that they do need a lot of breathing space. So not to compactly press them against the potting media, because it's not like any other common plants like roses, or you can name it, even jasmine. They may need to be compressed, but this particular one, no, especially when it comes to aeroids. Any aeroids, especially when you find that there is a root ball, aeration root ball, so they do need to have some breathing space. So the majority of the work is actually done. Now I'm actually layering the coconut chips around the plant, and just more of an arrangement just to see that the whole thing is stable, so that it won't be so floppy, and in case of overwatering, or heavy watering, and the plant may not just fall and drop. So in a way, arrange it in such a way that it's secured, but it's not strongly compressed. Here I'm actually using purely coconut chips, which I've actually trimmed them into bite sizes. You can actually use any of the aeroid mix which you have in your hands, or purchase them. There is no hard and fast rules that you can only must use this. In my case, it works best because of my garden condition, where it's always wet when it rains very heavily, and I don't want to have any rot problems. So coconut chips seems to be the best medium to use. Now after using the coconut chips, as I mentioned earlier, I'm just topping it up with river sand, just to give some body, so that there will this moisture will hold together with the coconut chips. Somehow I just find that sand and chips seems to go very well in this particular kind of a setup. So another main important thing that I want to make mention here is make sure that the crown is not fully submerged into the potting medium. So after repotting, just carefully tuck all of the plant just slightly above, so that the crown is visible and is not buried inside the the potting medium. This is very important, because if too much moisture and wetness seems to be absorbed into the crown, chances of the plant may rot, the crown rot may take place. So this is very important. I've done one mistake ago when it comes to one of the anthuriums, and I actually buried the whole thing, thinking that it actually aids the plant. Sad to say that I've notice that the rot has taken place. However, the plant may appear to be alive, but it was just barely surviving, and once the rot has taken hold of the whole stem, and the whole thing is lost. So do take note about it, not to bury the whole crown rot, because it's very important to make sure that the plant may continue to grow as it's not buried inside the potting media. So just a little bit of touch up, just trimming and removing all the burnt and spent leaves, and somehow I find that this plant is okay. Do remember to water the plant by at least within an hour's time, because if not do so, the young leaf shoots may wither. So in a way, do keep that in mind. So anyway, this particular plant is actually done, so we will move on to the next pot, and I will actually explain to you the other side of the challenges that actually appears. Based on my experience, I find that when it comes to Anthurium, which is very tall, one of the best things to do with that particular type of plant is to grow them in tall pots. And so especially like this particular one, you find that the root ball seems to be a little bit thick, but is not so much dense as is flattened itself. So this particular one, I will normally grow them in a tall pot. Some of the root balls over here has actually rotten away, so you can actually carefully remove them. They will just detach itself very easily. This is one of the important things to check on it, to make sure that nothing is rotting away. For this plant, I'm actually using a transparent plastic bottle, which I find that is very much practical, so I can actually watch and see if anything is just dying or rotting. Over here actually I made 4 drainage holes, which I find that anthuriums do love to have fast draining factor for it when it comes to potting media. Basically it's the same thing like the earlier planting medium. Over here I'm just checking and seeing whether the whole thing can fit in, so I find that it's okay. So the method is exactly the same. 30% of compost from the earlier pot that I've used, a little bit of styrofoam on that, so just give a little bit of drainage in case the root ball penetrates through into the compost. Here you can see that I'm actually placing the root ball in, and I find that it's not so bad. It just beautifully tuck itself inside. Of course you can actually use a bigger flower pot on it. For now I'm just using this just because I find that this particular one is still 2-leaf anthurium plant, so I'm not really expecting it to grow very fast anytime soon. But as for now, just for temporary sake, I'm just using this for this moment of time. A little bit of a support, just to give it a little bit of a body, because I don't want it to whole thing to flap and fall down, because this one anthurium plant which have not flowered yet, so I'm just waiting for it to see what actually happens. There are 2 types of anthurium, I'm pretty sure you're aware of it. One type is very much cultivated for the flowers, and the other one is more for their leaves. So this particular one is very much for the flowers. It's very much actually a rescue. Actually found this in a dump, and actually gotten it's in a very small plant, but I didn't realize it that is of a big variety. So I'm just waiting and see how it actually manifests itself. So after the compost, I'm actually placing in the coconut chips, similarly like what I've done earlier, just to give a little bit of body around the aerial roots and a little bit of support, just to give that little bit of a tug kind of thing, and just to make sure that the crown doesn't go into the potting media. Just like I mentioned to you, make sure the crown is not fully buried, and just to stabilize it, to make sure that everything is well balanced and tucked in. Once I have find that it is satisfactory in a way that it's not too much of coconut chips, at the same time it's just adequate, and I will actually use sand into it. And of course when it comes to this, after placing sand, I can actually tap down the whole pot into, just to make sure that the sand just covered all the empty spot around the flower pot, or in this case a plastic container. So there are some pockets here which is not full, so I can actually use a stick to push it through, and I did that. I just tap it down, and I think it should be okay. Do take note that after about say 2-3 months time, the potting medium does descend all the way down for at least another 20% 20% down, so it'll be a little bit more empty, but you don't have to really worry about it because you don't want it to be very compressed. But do take note that this do happen, so be aware of that. So this particular one is done. So the next one is the Anthurium brownie. It's a little bit more different from this other two. One of the things that I notice here is that when it comes to Anthurium, somehow I find that the root ball is quite unique. Now you can see over here, it appears to be okay. Actually, I don't have to repot it, but since I've decided to do so on this context and I have the time to, so I just want to check on it because it's not really growing very well. So here is what you can actually notice, that when I have uprooted it, and I find everything is good and perfect. So in a way I had nothing much to worry about. The only mistake that I've done is I have put too much of cotton fiber as drainage hole, and I think that is one of the inhibiting factor where I found actually another earthworm. Okay, so as coming back to it, too much of cotton fiber actually creating a lot of wetness inside the pot, and I find that it actually deters the fast draining medium. So this is one of the mistakes that I've done. So I do want to mention to you that when it comes to cotton fiber as drainage material, it does work, but too much actually does more damage. So we notice over here this particular root ball. What I want to mention to you is that the appearance of this is not like a common Anthurium. So brownie has very much similar like the Claverinum type of root ball. In a way, I find that both may be highly closely related because even these particular leaves are quite hard and they are not floppy. So same thing, 30% of compost or 1/3 of the flower pot. I noticed that the root ball has not actually fastened itself against the flower pot. In a way, I find that it's actually good in that context, that it's not overpotted. Another factor that I've noticed here is that the existing medium, which is over here, I find that the sand and the coconut chips has not overwhelmed the potting medium, similar like the earlier one that I've shown where the whole thing is actually turned into a compost. This one has not integrated into that, so in a way that is actually healthy. Now you will notice over here the root ball is very much appear to be like a succulent kind of a factor, except one or two which is actually rotten away. But I think overall everything appears to be healthy. So this is what I want to mention to you, not to trim off the root ball, especially this particular one, because if you do so, the whole plant can rot and can get into stress, and you may have to wait for a few months for it to overcome from its dormancy, and you'll be waiting too long for it, and you may lose the whole plant if it's overstressed. So basically is that, as I said, the root ball has become more like a crown kind of factor, just placing it and carefully to fill up the gaps in between the root structure. So this way it actually helps the plant to breathe through, especially the roots, sort of like the coconut chips and the sand actually helps the whole plant to breathe through around the root ball. So this particular one I don't really have to do like the earlier part where I have to separate the compost and then place in new chips and sand. This particular one I actually just use back the existing soil, or the potting medium. So these are things that you have to be aware of, so that you can, it will be more practical and being innovative in a sense that you don't have to change the whole thing and throw away and use totally a new one. And if it's still okay and it's still good, why waste it? Just make use of what is available. So basically this, and a little bit of space here and there, and I can just add on and just press in and compress it, just to make sure that everything is stable and strong. As I mentioned earlier, make sure that you don't bury the crown and and just give a little bit of tap and tug on it and place everything back and put them in order. And this particular one, I had a problem where I have actually placed too much of cotton fiber as the drainage material, and I'm able to correct it by using compost as at the bottom of it, and I think they're fine to go. I'm actually putting in this river sand on top of it just to give a little bit more body on it, so that it will be more stable and strong. Basically that's about it, so nothing much to worry. In this particular case, I doubt that the leaves will turn yellow or stress out. It may happen, but in most cases, based on my experience, it would not do so, especially when it comes to repotting. If you unpot and repot back immediately, there's less stress that can occur in this kind of circumstances. So basically that's what I've already done. I think majority of the work here is done in this particular video. So everything is actually very simple, not hard science on this. And if you can notice that I've actually avoided using all the expensive materials, and as simple as it is, practical and easy. Basically, when it comes to repotting, normally I will do it at least about 2 to 3 years once, based on circumstances and situation. Like over here, when I find that the plant is a little bit lanky and the root ball is not really appearing to be healthy, and if at all the plant appears to be a little bit burnt and something is wrong, in cases such as this, that I find that there's not much of nutrients that this particular anthurium is receiving, so placing it 30% of the compost actually helps them. It's finally the end product of how it appears to be right now. The leaves are a little bit faded, so I have to water it as soon as possible after this video. But I believe that this particular plant is very much stable and I don't have to worry about it. Just make sure that no rotting takes place, but I believe that shouldn't be a problem. Other than that, the other factors here is that make sure that it's not overwatered and kept in a bright indirect sunlight, and that's about that. So this is the end product of the potting repotting, and see how it goes from here. I believe that these are very hardy plants and there's nothing much to be worried about. Other than that, do just watch out and see if there is any yellowing. You will come across a factor where one or two leaves may turn yellow. That will be due to the stress of repotting, and especially this particular one that I've actually cut few of it and planted it in. So I do expect it, but somehow there will be new growth that will be taking place in 1 to 2 months time. So basically that's about that, so nothing much to worry about. So I have now come to the end of my video. If you have any questions, please put them in a comment below, and I'll try my best as my ability to answer them based on my experience and knowledge. So another thing here is that if you can, please do click like and subscribe and support my channel, and I would really appreciate if you could do so and journey with me in my garden plans of growing all this indoor rare plant collection which I have managed to cultivate and grow them in these past few years. So see you again in my next video. Take care and have a nice day. Bye.